And this is Two on One, the number one rated Disciples theological talk show about pop culture and the world in which we live. I am one of your co-hosts, the Reverend Arthur Stewart.
And I am your other co-host, the Reverend Stephanie Kendall, and thank you all for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for joining us today. I have been waiting for this episode for like a month because it's one of my favorite movies and it's one of my favorite people. And also, you're one of my favorite people too, Stephanie.
You're one of my favorite people too. Yeah, it feels like you were talking about this at the beginning of Lent, and somehow 40 days have flown by, and here we are. Hey, Arthur, happy Holy Week, buddy.
Happy Holy Week. And also, I'm coming up, tomorrow is my 10th anniversary of ordination into Christian ministry, which is pretty cool.
I had a friend send me a pom-pom, and it's now my like go-to cheer.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's better than the little like reaction. So, I just got to tell you, after Ted Lasso and after all of these just like marvelous guests we're having, this is kind of the perfect Holy Week episode as we are waiting for resurrection and talking Waiting for Guffman with Dr. Sarah Morice Brubaker.
So excited.
And I had this wacky idea. Okay. So I'm just 2 weeks ago we were talking about Catherine O'Hara because Jeff Wunrow Designs makes exquisite liturgical vestments, copes and miters and chasubles, and because Jeff Wunrow Designs does custom work.
That I could go full Moira Rose at David and Patrick's wedding, and I assure you that I have thought about this so much since the last time you said it.
I assume far more than I, and that's reasonable and fair. So consider this as we again enter the oeuvre of Catherine O'Hara. I was thinking about tie-ins as we talk Jeff Wunrow Designs.
That they're celebrating 16 years of making ordinary time extraordinary?
Yes, and
that they specialize in liturgical textiles, including paraments, banners, altar cloths, as well as clergy items?
Yes, they make stoles for every season and a wide swath of pastors and deacons from denominations and positions and theological interpretations love what they do.
So gorge. I love him so much. All I do is like, at least once a week, I like scroll through the catalog. And for our listeners, for those of you that are listening or watching us, you know that you have a special listening code at Jeff Wunrow Designs at checkout. You go and enter 2 on 1, all one word, all letters, not numbers, or all letters, not numbers, and they'll give you 15% off your entire stole order.
It's a stole, boom, boom, boom.
Stop it.
Sewing, crafting, never stopping, never sleeping, sewing, making, some for selling, some for keeping.
Oh, it's going to be an hour, friends.
An hour.
Check out jeffwunrow.com after our show today or at any time because the internet is accessible 24 hours a day. It is Holy Week. Y'all, if you are a pastor out there or a faith leader or just, or you're someone that loves one of those people, go to Jeff Wunrow Designs. Get a stole for that person that has worked so hard this Holy Week to make sure that you and your communities are connected and loved well this Holy Week and Easter season.
You're worth it. So we thank Jeff Wunrow Designs for not only 16 years of making ordinary time extraordinary, but being our lead sponsor. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Alrighty. I am ready to admit Dr. Sarah Morice Brubaker. So I'm doing.
I'm so excited.
I'm so excited. And here she is. Welcome, Dr. Sarah Morice Brubaker. We are very glad to have you with us today. Welcome to 2 on 1.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with you.
We are very excited to have you. And I will just, you and I are meeting for the first time here. And, but Arthur has been talking about the vision of this episode for quite some time. And so I'm super excited that you are our Holy Week guest and that we get to continue, waiting for Guffman as we wait for Jesus. So.
Yes, right. Spoiler alert. Yeah.
Oh, this is a spoiler show, although a movie that came out over a decade ago, I'm pretty sure we're all right on spoilers.
It was the 90s, wasn't it? Did you think the 90s were a decade ago? That happens to me all the time.
Well, I already told you that I was not about to name when I actually saw this and how long ago it was.
I'm sorry. I forgot about that.
No,
I remember seeing the trailer in a movie theater and thinking, wow, that looks weird. I love it. But again, we won't talk about how long ago that was.
Exactly, because I'm with you. I saw it in the theater, and in high school, my my theater group all went and saw it in the theater. So it was very much I was like, I don't want to name how long ago that was for me, but it has been a part of the repertoire of theater kids for quite some time, let's just say.
That sounds like the best possible way to get introduced to Waiting for Guffman is to watch it with your theater group in high school. Wow.
My best friend Lou called me and was like, Lou is this brilliant musical genius person. He's like, you got to come over and listen to the soundtrack to Waiting for Guffman. And I was like, I thought it was Waiting for Godot. I don't know why. And I was like, no, I'm going to pass. I did not see this movie until my now husband had me watch it with him, like on our 4th date.
Holy cow.
Oh.
Yeah.
I watched it in high school that one time, and then because we were then fully formed on Rent, and so we like transferred our momentum there. And then I watched it again for probably the second time in probably 25 years last night. And
oh wow,
it is actually 25 years old. So
yeah, that makes sense.
A quarter century of Guffman. Well, this is a banner.
So, Sarah, why did you pick Waiting for Guffman? Why is this? I guess you were kind of invited on it, but why Guffman? What's so great about it?
I love Waiting for Guffman. I love Christopher Guest and his mockumentary crew. I quote Waiting for Guffman in all situations. I've not yet quoted Waiting for Guffman at a funeral. No, I take that back. My cousin and I, at my grandfather's funeral in college, we did a whole scene because when you're there at the visitation for hours, you end up getting a little goofy. I just love it. And I saw it before I was a theology nerd and was a theater nerd and loved it then. And then it has stood me in good stead through my shift in vocation.
Well, this is excellent. And I guess I'd like to start us off with a question because I think it's vital. With my friend Michael Riggs once told me, worship is either good theater or bad theater, you choose. And I love the Kierkegaard idea that God is the audience, we are the performers, rather than the other way around. So we have this community theater in Blaine, Missouri that does ridiculous shows. Where does the church find its theatrics, so to speak? Like how do we equip the church to I think of the beginning of Stolboom when they all do like the motion, but they're making that face to the audience of like, isn't this silly? And the audience is laughing. Like, where's our theatrics?
Yeah. That's funny because I was thinking about this last night and I was going along similar lines. I was thinking about how many of the things I love about theater are the things I love about church. And in particular, the things I've loved about community theater are the things that I love about just a regular worshiping community of regular folks where it's not that everyone is like Broadway ready. There's some people who have some really impressive skills, but then there's, the guy who gives the monologue about beans, Don't get me started on beans. I mean, there's that guy, right? Like, doesn't every church have a beans guy? Ron and Sheila, I feel like I've been in plays with them. I feel like I've gone to church with them. And I just kind of love that because community theater, I think, is, well, it's right there in the name. The Blaine community players are rooted in a town and a wider circumstance that, sure, they want to do a good job and they have these Broadway dreams. But ultimately, what's so wonderful about Red, White, and Blaine is maybe I would say not the stellar script writing that initially piqued Guffman's interest and would have brought him there had there not been snowstorms in New York, but the relationships and the way that the characters change as a result of taking part. And so to the extent that the church can do that, I think that's the really marvelous thing.
So there's the transformative aspect.
Yeah.
I like that. And I guess I'm sorry, Spiff. Would you care to answer this question? I'm not trying to, and you don't have to. You just shot me a look like, why would I do that?
No, I'm just I always think it's a really interesting question because as someone who's trained in theater and who has been to seminary and now pastors, the intersection of both is really beautiful. You know, we often forget that scripture was meant to be essentially a performative act, right? It comes from your diaphragm and your gut. You needed to be an orator to really kind of like share the good news and talk about what God is doing in the world. And so, and now and that used to be something that like, you know, a certain sect of people could do, but now it's really it's beautiful that everyone is allowed and can and has access to that work. And so for me, what I liked about Guffman and what I remembered about Guffman is that like it does equip those with not the most expansive gifts, but gifts nonetheless to be empowered to perform for themselves and for a community. And that performance in and of itself isn't a bad thing, right? We often think of it as being superficial, that you're putting on a performance and it's not authentically you. This could also just be my very threeness talking and my Enneagram threeness talking, but there, you know, the authenticity of the performance is really part of what changes you and how you move and grow from it. One of my very favorite things, and it's kind of like an aside and it's not pivotal to the point, but like at the end when Dr. Pearl moves to to Florida,
Yes.
that this one very intentional, very small, you know, kind of very odd part that he plays in this larger community space leads him to understand his vocational calling in a new way, in a new space and time. And I'm like that for me is what good performative worship, community gathering, building does, even if it pulls you away from that intentional community. And that's where I think the crux is because often we as community members want to say, you did so well for us and with us, stay here.
Stay here and do what you did this last time forever.
Forever, yeah.
Yes.
And so for me, that is really when you hear him say, like, I'm, you know, I found my love in Florida, or whatever he says in that last line. That's the good work of the gospel and the spirit at work in community when you can let them go to really live their best lives.
Oh, yes, I love that. And I'm thinking too about how Mrs. Pearl got to know her own husband better in the course of him being in Red, White, and Blaine. And I can only imagine, though I don't think we see this, that she was supportive and she was saying, you know, I don't usually hang out with show business type.
The creatives.
Yeah. And she was just loving it. So, oh gosh, you've got me wanting to write Dr. and Mrs. Pearl fan fiction now.
Oh, I would read that. So just in case you're wondering who would read that, Arthur and I are happy to read it. And I'm sure all of our viewers are as well.
We'll be made a Kishka behind the scenes. Yeah.
So I like that idea of like, maybe transformation requires us to move on. Like it's as we talk about resurrection, a little early, and that's okay. The resurrected Christ is always in motion. The disciples are sent out. The apostles are sent out. I mean, literally apostolos, sent. They don't get to stay where they were, and they don't get to stay how they were. And I mean, I understand the performative aspect. Fun fact or preview in this, with the Doctor of Ministry work I'm doing at Phillips, I'm drafting you to be my reader because it's about improvisation and communal worship. And
that sounds great. Yes.
Only once. And so there's a finitude, a temporality, this moment matters in theater. The set gets struck the moment after the last performance ends. It's done.
Sorry, keep going.
Well, how does the church that is so about permanence, and we have a building in the same space, and we have a calendar that we know the seasons, and we always, how do we get impermanence, finitude into our praxis? Or is that way out there? Forgive me.
I actually think I'm going to try this out. I could be way off, but the title, you already mentioned Waiting for Godot, but my understanding is that is meant to reference the Beckett play. And so I think about how in Waiting for Godot, or Godot, wherever you live, there's this sense that at once the title character is absent, but also all surveilling. And I doubt that Gaston Levy intended to make such a philosophical point, because we know that it's largely improvised, but there's a sense in which Guffman doesn't get to retain the kind of absent but all present surveilling almost pall that he casts over the proceedings, and that when it turns out that they do get news, like in a way that the characters in Waiting for Godot never do. They're just still standing there waiting, but the cast of Red, White, and Blaine learns that Guffman's not coming. And then in a way, I think that's what frees them up to move, to take what they got from that experience and do something with it out of their own agency, rather than just continuing to say, let's get stuck in this moment and hope that eventually the absent authority figure comes and gives approval. He's not coming. And so now what are you going to do?
Yeah,
I think that's one way that impermanence can be brought about. And I think maybe there's some impulses towards that in Christian traditions and theology. But of course, then there's also the impulse to keep saying, he's coming back any minute, so be good. Don't change anything.
Jesus is really going to like this mural that was painted in 1970 of Noah's Ark.
Right. My great.
A real art critic, that Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus will come back and be like, hold up, you got rid of the mural? Oh, well,
I really expect him to be like, why did you think I was white? What indicated at...
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing.
Now, when
right. Come back and be like, who's Plato? Why are you explaining my importance in terms of Plato? That's so weird. You know I was Jewish, right?
Well, I think that goes back, I think, to why improv within worship is part of the pull for people to come, right? So that there is an understanding, and so Derrida has this understanding of what's event, right? So nothing can it has to be unique, it can't be created, it can't be destroyed. It's like this all-encompassing thing that is unique to that moment. And so for me, I always kind of hope that I'm creating a worship experience that is unique, that draws people in because they don't want to miss the work that the Spirit is doing in this community, because the Spirit is one of improv, is one of the unexpected. And so to continue to move communities of faith forward in that way, that destructs, allowing the Spirit to move, deconstructs the kind of finite, like the positionality of the church and how we stay focused, how we stay put in one way rather than move the way that the gospel actually intends us to.
I love that. And I'm going to make a lateral move here. It's making me think of some reading I've been doing this week, because we have concentrated course weeks and then Holy Week all in a row. So there's like, if you're not teaching a concentrated course, there's this 3-week stretch to get research done. So I've been doing a deep dive into Augustine for a book I'm writing. Derrida to Augustine to Guffman, of course, it's all obvious. But in his sermons, because his group of Christians, and they're called a lot of times Donatists, but that was the term given to them by their opponents. So one author I really like refuses to call them that and calls them dissidents. They were dissident Christians as well. They kept eyes on each other so much that they would send people to go and like dictate the sermons given by important preachers in the other group. So there are moments in Augustine's sermons in the text where you can see him changing his tactic based on the congregation's reaction, which you don't think of. I mean, I think when I first encountered Augustine, I thought, well, he spoke in treatises that were, the words came written in Latin out of his mouth onto pages, and there was no person involved. It was just kind of emission of texts. And to watch him realizing that an analogy isn't working, because he did have a complicated audience to preach to. He'd gotten a fancy education, but he wasn't preaching.
Can you imagine Augustine as your preacher?
I would skip the sermons on concupiscence. I'd be like, thank you. That's you, buddy, and God love you. I hope you work on that, but no.
Well, Augustine, he can sing, he can act, he can dance. There's only one other person on the planet who can do that, and that's Barbra Streisand.
Barbra Streisand, yeah.
Hey, Babs.
Wow, that would be a...
For those of you keeping track at home, that's one.
So I have a kind of a question. I don't know if it's adjacent or parallel or even related, but that's it.
Is it how many babies fit in a tire?
Depends how many babies fit in a tire. Theologically, though.
Yes.
Put your answer.
An infinite number.
Yeah, put your answers in the comments. We'll read them out loud.
And God, like a tire, is very long.
Exactly. What is the benefit, or is there a benefit of treating every new member in the church, every person that walks through the doors, with the same type of hope and anticipation that this troop treats Guffman, who ends up being just this man, Roy Loomis, right? Like, if you treat every person you don't know as Guffman when they're only a Roy Loomis, what do we, how do we as the church position ourselves in hospitality to offer that expansive hope in the people that we don't know?
Oh, I love that question. I'm just imagining everybody who comes in getting a balloon.
Exactly.
Not even a helium balloon, just
a balloon. Yeah.
A balloon.
That you take to the infants in your life.
Yeah. Oh, golly.
So that's when I served a church in Dallas, we had a gentleman who was sleeping under a bush on our property. I was in North Dallas and kind of north of the hoity-toity part, but not unhoity-toity. We were next to this progressive, eco-friendly preschool named for Da Vinci, called the Da Vinci School. Anyways, the guy that was sleeping under our bush was shoving his empties under the fence, like onto the playground of the preschool. So like the preschool came by and said, can you guys do something about your guest? I said, can we get him a trash can? But our property department decided to trim the bush hung down. So they decided to trim around it and basically take away his shelter. And I remember I said to the property chair, if that turns out to be Jesus Christ, I'm going to be very pissed off. And maybe, but that's the idea, right? Guffman is this salvific idea.
Yeah.
Within the context of waiting for Guffman. So perhaps if I'm just getting that Hebrews 13 from 11. I hate Hebrews. The letter. But
the letter.
Yeah. But I get that you may be entertaining angels, I think is what
it's exactly what it is. You may be entertaining angels. You may, you never know how Jesus is showing up in your life. And so, yeah. I don't know, Sarah?
Oh, I love it. Gosh, I'm thinking about what a different approach that is to visitors than, my kids are teenagers now. So, but when we were, a young family and we'd visit a new church, especially an aging one, it'd be like, hi, come and favor dying, sure. Yes. And that was not maybe the best welcome. But imagining that any new person could bring you, like this fulfillment. I mean, what are they hoping for with Guffman's arrival? That Guffman will come to this community theater and say, I like this show enough with all its great songs, like Stool Boom.
Stool Boom's my favorite song. Like,
I love Stool Boom.
Guffman, just generally.
That's good.
Yeah. Stool Boom's a great little tune. And nothing ever happens on Mars, and say, yeah, I think this is really ready for Broadway. And not only is it ready for Broadway, but we want to take the same cast who are not members of Actors Equity, presumably. So it's kind of like, how did they think this was going to work? Was Guffman even, like, why was Guffman even entertaining Guffman? There's so many implausible things.
But isn't that mystery, though? Like, isn't that the mystery of our faith? Guffman has come, Guffman has financed, Guffman will move us to New York.
Right. Yeah. What is the Broadway equivalent of the church right now? Right. So like, what are we hoping that next stranger, that next angel that we entertain, that next time that Jesus walks through our doors and brings us to, what is that we are hoping?
Oh no. Yeah. What if Guffman represents rapture theology? Like the unparalleled, uninvited. I don't think salvation's meant to be logically perceived, but like the ridiculousness of like, yeah, Jesus is going to whisk me off to heaven and let me watch all the sinners burn for 7 years because that's how I read Daniel.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's interesting. That's how I read Daniel. So I'm thinking about the textuality of Guffman's reply to Corky. We may need to have a Westar Guffman seminar.
Oh, yes.
That would be fun. I'm not going to lie. I might just
pitch it.
Leave all my attachments and just devote myself full time to the Guffman seminar if that existed.
I'm here for it. Yeah. But I for me, I was watching as like, we talked to little churches about being medium churches. We talked to medium churches about being big churches. We talked to big churches about being nationally recognized, and there's these kind of level ups rather than saying like, this is for Blaine. This needs to stay in Blaine, and it needs to, it needs to give life in Blaine. And why is it that we're always looking for the what's next and for someone else to bring us into the what's next rather than valuing who we are in the here and now?
Gosh, yeah, that's really, really good. I'm thinking now about, so the tiny little Mennonite fellowship, no pastor, lay led that I'm part of. And we also belong to a UCC church that in the before times we would go to in the morning and then have afternoon church with Mennonites. But, I think about like, what would my Guffman be for that? And it would be somebody saying like, here is a building that's in an area that's like not gentrified, but is close enough to the gentrified area to be cool, but like still have cred. And it's got great land that you could have a garden on, and you could just like live out this vision of cool, crunchy, progressive Christianity that people would write about, and that the seminary would promote and say, look what our professor was involved in. And people would say, wow, you're affiliated with blah, blah,
come famous talk at every conference and tell us how you did it.
Right. And, that's probably not going to happen. But I like our little Blaine crowd. And I wonder, is it maybe the case that to love Blaine is you can't love Blaine. You can't love the idea of Blaine. You can't love Blaine from a distance. You kind of have to actually just know the rhythms of life in Blaine and Corky's apartment with the outsized stare and Libby Mae Brown at the DQ. Like you have to just know the specifics. You can't sort of.
Well, and if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. But with hard work, we could get that down to 3 or 4.
I'm not just saying that.
Well, and that's place again, and that's the mutual agreement upon what place is, and it's so my favorite. No, that's not true. I just love that entire movie. When he goes to the city council and he says, "I need $150,000,
something like that."
$100,000.
$100,000. I can do this for $100,000, and our entire budget's $15,000. I've done ministry.
And that includes swimming. There's no swimming in my show.
But I've done that. Like, and I mean, I'm having conversations right now. We're restarting our youth and children's ministry. And it's finding this balance between this requires a 5-year investment, not only in time and staff and material, but in believing the church is worth sustaining at the level we're doing it and beyond for 5 years.
Wow.
And I think, I don't know. I know that Blaine couldn't raise $100,000 if they tried, but also he was almost laughed out of the room. He was laughed out of the room, essentially. I don't know.
Why do we underfund things at their value, right? Like, because that's the value of a medium-sized show, a community theater show. Like, it costs a decent chunk of money to put on theater. The arts are underfunded. And so, I mean, that's a full stop. The arts are underfunded, friends. But so like, why do we laugh directly at people who are asking honest requests? Or maybe not laugh, but why do we not even entertain them? Why was, oh my gosh, this is such a meaningful thing for our community. You need way more money than we have. Let's think about how to do this together, right? Do we allow, as the church, Big C and Little C Church, for new creatives, new leaders within our midst to actively and faithfully value the work that needs to be done, even when it's in opposition to the work that we are, or not opposition, but just in creative, maybe conflict with the work that we are doing already, which I think I saw a lot this last year for communities that were like, we don't want to go online. Like, that's just not who we are. We are in-person people. And it's like, but you gotta, and they're like, well, how much is it going to cost? And it's like, well, what is the cost of community to you, right? Because that's the answer that you need to find for yourself.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if, what do we think that the at-large conversation and question is of why do we allow new people in our community to thrive faithfully in the midst of financial insecurity,
so they don't have to go home and bite their pillow, ideally. Yeah. So now I'm thinking about Larry Miller's character.
Yes.
I can't remember the character's name. Is he the city manager? He's on the town council. Yeah. And yeah, he's an interesting guy because it seems like he controls some access to the resources, but he's not a very broad-minded thinker. It's not even really clear what he wants, except to kind of posture himself in a certain way in the room. So, am I remembering correctly that he is the biggest obstacle, right? He's the one who says, Corky, and he kind of scoffs. The other guy, and that's Barbara Streisand, that guy, he seems to be rooting for Corky, but sort of saying, like, we don't have that much money. And what's her name, Fagin, the one who, I'm not just saying that because I am a Fagin, she's sort of nodding sympathetically, like,
well, and she gets
like we white ladies learn to do.
She gets to, because she's related to the person that started the town, right? So there's another question in there too, is like, what role does legacy play in our communities?
Well,
yeah. So we have Larry Miller as the gatekeeper. We have, what's her name, Fagin, as she says, like, I certainly know how the Kennedys feel.
Yeah.
Well, they're the owners, and that's the danger.
Yeah.
Every church has owners, whether they mean to or not, but it's gatekeeping and it's legacy, and it's why would you come into this community and think you can affect change? You're going to do what we allow you to do by default or on purpose, and you're going to be happy with it.
I wonder if she, like, it might have been interesting to see her character object to treating something as serious as the life of Blaine Fagin and the founding of Blaine with something as lighthearted as a musical. I could imagine that. I could imagine it going that way. It didn't, but.
Speaking of Blaine Fagin, okay.
Yes.
Can we talk about, we're in California. We're clearly not, but we're settling.
You smell the salt air.
What do we do with people who set up tents in trauma?
Oh, wow.
Blaine is founded on not only a lie but a con.
Yeah.
We all have people who are refugees. To borrow from Katie Hayes from a few weeks ago, we have refugees in our community who only. What do we do? How do we? I guess the right way is, how do we resurrect trauma, or how do we resurrect from it without dishonoring it and without leaving it behind?
Right.
Well, I think part of
it here. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, like, part of it is that we oh, you go, Sarah, because I just lost my first train of thought.
Well, I was just thinking, would the analogy be people who just their whole identities are kind of formed around an idea of Jesus was about being accepted into your heart so that you individually could go to heaven instead of hell when you die, and then realize, well, that's anachronistic, and Jesus would not have made any sense of that, and that's actually very American, and it's been very harmful. And most Christian, like most of the time there's been Christianity, that would be an unrecognizable idea, and then have to contend with that. Or is it more like people who've been traumatized by and in the name of that vision, even if they didn't share it themselves, or both?
Well, I mean, I know a lot of gays in the church, a lot of them. I would argue that probably my time at Bright and Phillips has introduced me to a disproportionate amount of former Baptists, Pentecostals, and non-denominational Christians who knew they were gay, who were told they were wrong, that they were, at fault, and they needed to get right or get left, or they needed to leave. And what happens is, and it's funny to me because I always talk about starting like the big gay dinner club, of just doing like a dinner church only for ex-fundamental queers, which would be a marvelous meal thinking about it. But it would be, there's like this seed that gets planted, and it might blossom really beautifully. It might even have some cuttings that are valuable or medicinal, but it's insidious. And it's so being in Blaine, I just love when they show it in the musical, like, yeah, smell the salt air. And I mean, Missouri is as far from California as you can get. By the way, Sarah Morice Brubaker and I are both from St. Louis, so I'm super excited. And I will use the word Hoosier, which has to come out at some point.
Yeah, which means something different in St. Louis than it does anywhere else.
And see, and I'm from California, so
that's, there you go. And
I loved at the very end. So two thoughts on that. One, in response to you, how do we grow from trauma or how out of trauma is we can't idolize it, right? Like we can't allow the councilwoman thing to live into this understanding that she has some sort of, claim over what is happening in Blaine because she is a direct descendant, right? Like we've got to cut these types of things off. It's why it goes back to the church being able and being needed to renew itself on a larger level. And then it also kind of, for me, this goes back to a little bit of, is it Libby May? Is that her name? Parker Posey. When she said, I'm always welcome back at the Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
That for me, like that is that growing spaces where it's like, you can always lean back into your really terrible theology, but if you're moving with Jesus, you're in the play, you have the hopes of Broadway. And while your Dairy Queen upbringing and hospitality services may inform the way in which you perform your role in this space, you always have the ability to go back on that comfort, and which is your privilege and some of that trauma and all of that for whatever reason.
And so welcome back at the Dairy Queen.
You're always welcome back at the Dairy Queen.
I did not expect that to be so deep of a pastoral statement.
Wow. But it's a different Dairy Queen in a different state.
Yes.
So that she could live with her dad, who's no longer incarcerated.
But it's exactly the same.
Yeah. Same tasks required over.
But it also has given her, you notice in her monologue, the very first monologue is like, we do, blizzards and blah, blah, and hamburgers. Okay. And then this next one, at the end, when she's back at the Dairy Queen, her time in Red, White, and Bland, and her time of that coming into herself allows her to think, at least in her own context, bigger, right? She's like, I'm wondering what type of new dessert treat I can create.
Make it really healthy.
Yeah, she wants a healthy chocolate
shake.
Exactly. But so it's going back to where she is, but she has changed, right? So that even when we lean back into the comforts of whatever our privileges are, like she knows more now. And so she's accountable to her own self and knowledge, even when she goes back to the Dairy Queen.
So worship should be transformative. You should not leave anything at a church the same as when you left or same as when you came. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking about Bonnie, because you mentioned the ex-fundamentalist queer dinner party. I mean, so Corky is like, what's that?
I said, we have people on the chat wanting to come to this, wanting to come to the big gay dinner party. So,
well, I need to see who's in the chat saying that. So,
hey, you've launched a new ministry right here.
There you go.
But Corky's wife, Bonnie, who nobody ever sees, the other unseen character, Bonnie, whose clothes he buys.
And I got Bonnie the pantsuit.
Right. So at the end, he's back in New York running his little shop, and I got to think, maybe he's not. Maybe he didn't bring Bonnie with him, so to speak. Maybe in New York, running his show business themed musical theater shop, he's able to be a little freer about himself and his identity than he was in Blaine, Missouri.
He showed up, he got off the boat with only a dance belt and a chapstick.
Isn't that how you travel? I'm pretty sure that's how we all travel, right?
Well, yeah.
And I came to Blaine and I thought maybe I'd be a construction worker. What was it? What with those hats?
Okay.
Can we talk about masculinity for a second and Corky St. Clair? So first of all, if you haven't read it, Kristen Capps-Dumez did Jesus and John Wayne about white evangelicalism, but it's really about masculinity and the just perturbed way it happens. Kristen Dumez, I know you're not watching right now, but you should come on 2-on-1.
You don't know. They might be.
Yeah, you're right. Please respond to my email. So Corky St. Clair is not masculine, period. He is, and one of the big gags is when Savage drops out of the show and he takes, I'm going to go fight in the war.
To fight and perhaps to die so that young men from here to Timbuktu can feel the wind of freedom blowing in their hair.
This is amazing.
I've watched it a lot.
So here for this.
Corky, we want you to live. My husband did comment on our feed, and I'm glad he's watching.
Yes.
I love it with theater because you can be whoever you want to be. This is made in the 90s, and what I love about it is it's not playing Corky St. Clair being a member of the queer community as a joke. Like there's no dehumanizing humor about it. He's just weird as hell, and he's also probably not heteronormative. How do we see? This is where I'm going to crack on the question. I apologize. What does it mean that people love the shows, that they sit through it, that they're celebrating it, that they're there to support the weirdest man in town who happens to be what does it mean for Corky to be allowed to be confident in who Corky is and for people to just accept him? I guess where's acceptance versus tolerance in this model? What do we see? That wasn't sorry. This is incidentally why I don't teach, because there has to be like a real answer to questions, not just like
no, there
doesn't.
Oh, okay.
Not in theology. The old joke about the difference between a philosopher and a theologian is the philosopher is looking at midnight in a dark room with the walls painted black for a black cat, that isn't there. And the theologian is looking at midnight in the dark room with the walls painted black for a black cat that isn't there and finds it. So, in theology classes, there's no right answer. I like that. I wonder, so in my kind of canonical, my headcanon about Blaine, because I find Blaine so charming and the character's so familiar, it reminds me a lot actually of the church I grew up in. Which wasn't in a small town. It was in Ferguson, actually. But a lot of the same kind of Midwestern, not particularly yet having their finger on the pulse, like, but getting there, and having attitudes that would be stated one way, but if you were in the group, wouldn't be, you know what I mean? So what I'd like to imagine, which is probably not very realistic, is that most people knew Bonnie didn't exist and we're allowing Corky to maintain the fiction. Yep. But I know that's probably not the case.
And communities do it. Like, there's a video somewhere of this kid, at his bar mitzvah, doing a dance to, I think it was a Vogue. And yep, little gay boy, that's fine. And communities know it, and they're not surprised by it, and they're not going to condemn it overtly, but they're not going to condone it. And I don't know if
and they're not going to nurture it.
Yeah.
So
didn't you want them to get together though, Corky and
that guy?
The guy who obviously had a crush on him? I was like, go with him to New York, help him run his store.
So this is an extra canonical question, I suppose. It's within the realm of the Christopher Guest verse. It's Guffman adjacent.
Let's bring the conversation to 11.
Yes, right. It's blowing peace and freedom. It's blowing you and me. So one of the big things Netflix was proud of is they got Christopher Guest to do mascots a few years ago.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't going to work because Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara were starting this little show in Canada called Schitt's Creek. And it wasn't very good. They brought in new comedians, and new comedians rely on vitriol. And there's just none of that in Guffman. But Corky St. Clair came back.
Yes, that's right. I only saw it once, but I remember now.
And Parker Posey said in an interview, she said, Christopher Guest did this to me because I needed to see Corky St. Clair again. I was going through stuff in my life, and I had to have it. And he did that for me.
I didn't know that. That's so beautiful.
How do we respectfully, one, how do we ask for help? Because sometimes it's just, I need to see Jesus.
Yeah.
And two, how do we show back up for people who have left us?
He says in a time of pandemic and COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
On Holy Week.
Yeah. And when they're predicting, like, I'm sure you've seen the thing making around, like, listen, guys, a lot of people aren't going to come back to church. They're out of the habit. They realize they don't miss it as much as they thought they would.
And if we're
I miss it terribly.
Online, let's just,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's really, I didn't know that story. I did know that Christopher Guest and Eugene Levy make sure that everyone gets paid the same in all of those mockumentaries. And so I'm wondering, it seems like the material conditions of your life together create opportunities or could foreclose on opportunities to say, like, I need help. So I could see how being part of a group that works collaboratively and shares income equally and kind of takes equal responsibility for the story, then also makes it okay to say, I really need to see Corky again. Can you show up as Corky?
And that it's, I think for us, and part of like what we're doing, especially as faith leaders, like sometimes we get really cerebral, we get really into like the metaphor or whatever. And sometimes we just need to be like, yo, Jesus is here.
Yeah.
Like, and to really, like, a couple weeks ago, I was preaching and I was just like, AAPI hate is a sin. Like, and you just gotta, like, full stop it, right? You gotta, sometimes we love, because Jesus speaks in parallels and metaphors and all of that, we think that that's the way in which we also have to teach. And so, and that's sometimes true, because it's helpful to see, like, new parallels and old, allegories all come together. But sometimes we need to turn around and say that man in the bushes is Jesus. We need to say, for our own spirit, for our own faith life, and for our own understanding of how Jesus works in community, we just need to come out and say, I need Jesus. Jesus is here, and this is in that way. In the same way that, sometimes you need to say, for whatever it is for each of us. Like, sometimes you just got to go watch the thing that brings you comfort and joy. Parker Posey says, I need to see Corky St. Clair today, and there he is, and we have access to it. And so I think that, it's part of it is just to deconstruct enough to get out of our own way and say these things in a way that people need to hear sometimes, which is plainly and with emphasis on the present. That it's not the things that we are doing now to get Jesus to come, but it is the things we are doing today with Jesus that will, in fact, affect who we are as a worshiping community and a faith body for whenever this new version of Jesus comes back, or for the kingdom, for heaven, for whatever thing you want to point toward.
For the final performance. And I think
for the final performance.
Which gets back to what you were both saying earlier about improvisational worship and the improvisational nature of community. Because I'm thinking about how in improv, there's the rule, like, don't, no, but, always say yes and. So if somebody says, hey, great ball game we're at, and you're improving, you don't say, ball game, what are you talking about? We're at a pharmacy. Because then
how are you so stupid that you think we're at a ball game? Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I think one danger of having a BA in religious studies, a Master of Theological Studies, and a PhD in theology, and then being employed as a teacher of theology and some kind of supposed expert, is that, and maybe especially on the progressive side of things, I can really get into the trap of thinking that my job is to disabuse. Mm. And sometimes my job is to disabuse, but I can't always be no-butting, whether it's in a theology classroom or in a worshiping community or a lay-led fellowship of Mennonites that meets on Zoom. Just saying no, but, or we're not at a ball game, we're at a pharmacy. Like, you can't, that's not, constantly correcting people isn't very winsome. And it's also not necessary. I mean, if there's not something hopeful, if there's not something to be excited about, then quit, do something else. I mean, I know it's easier said than done. I too like to have health insurance and an income, but if all it's about is saying, well, we're going to go to our graves feeling superior to the religious right because they're stupid and we're not, like, nah, that's, find another, if that's all that's left of Christianity, like, find someone, do Zumba. Zumba communities are great. Do that instead. But if there is something liberating and exciting and life-giving that has to do with Jesus, say yes and occasionally.
Oh, say yes and to Jesus. There you go. Yes, I love it. Say yes and to Travis giving us a video or a music for our final question that we're coming into.
No, he actually he texted me about it. He's not going to do it, to which I said to him, well, then I just hate you and your ass face, Travis. We actually asked our general minister and president if she could take away his standing for not writing.
I did not ask that. I want to point
that question.
I did not.
I'll let you, if you want. I wrote a song about heresies. You're welcome to it for you.
Yes, 1,000%. But as we are pivoting into our final question, Dr. Sarah Morice Brubaker, we are so grateful for you and thank you for this.
This is so much fun. I loved this.
Incredible conversation. So fun. So thank you. And
thank you.
So as is our tradition, and as you are our guest, you get to answer first our final question, which is, what biblical story, theme, character, book are you most reminded of in Waiting for Guffman?
I'm reminded most. You said biblical?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm reminded of the deeply ironic ways that it's possible to interpret, lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age, because Guffman never showed up, and yet Guffman, in his absence, is with every single one of the characters for the rest of their lives. Ron and Sheila try to go pro, they leave Blaine. Dr. Pearl is singing Booby Made a Kishka at the retirement center, and even Libby Mae Brown is, fanning her chicken wing, but in a different place at a different deep, and thinking about how to make a healthy shake. So, and Corky's in New York. Johnny Savage, he doesn't really change, but that's because he didn't see it through. And I think that, the town is changed as well. So, and then Corky shows up in Mascots. So, so I think that coincidence of presence and absence, where the enduring presence ends up being a deferral, a kind of endless deferral. And that is actually the mode in which Guffman or God, same diff, are with us to the end of the age, whatever that means.
I love it. It's a great. Arthur, you want to go? You want me to go?
Yeah, I'll go. I love that the Gospel of John tells a story that is parallel, but like even the disciples are changed out. And I like that we know. I used to be very obsessed with the Apostle Matthias because literally he just won a coin toss. Like that's what we know about him, is that he won a coin toss. And they're like, "You're not Judas Iscariot. Come on in." There's people in Red, White, and Blaine who walk behind the number stool boom, spinning the gears, and standing in the crowd waving at William McKinley, and we have no idea who they are. They don't even get like mentioned in passing, and yet the show without them would be less than.
Yes,
it's a little piece of perspective for me. I've always liked Matthias and James the Lesser because, like, they did something. We don't know what it was, but they did something. So, Spiff?
So mine is a little, it's a nuanced from a quote. I have equated Ron Albertson is the disputed epistles because he knows the script, but decides that whenever there's an opening to just throw in a line from any show that he knows. So,
I'm pretty sure that's Colossians. No, it's not. It's Ephesians.
So for me, Ron Albertson, who just says, whenever there's an opening in a line, I just throw in, something that I know, even if it's not from that show. That for me is the disputed epistles.
I don't know if I've mentioned this recently. I'm actually reading through 2 Corinthians very slowly. No, I bring that up every week because it's funny. Okay, where are we? I'm pulling up our promo graphic because we do want to note that 2-on-1 is sponsored by Jeff Wonrow Designs. I need to share my screen or else you don't get to see it. Only I get to see it. So there we go. Jeff Wonrow Designs is our lead sponsor. We're very glad that he is celebrating 16 years of making ordinary time extraordinary. Check out jeffwonrow.com. That is an invitation to you, Sarah. Lay-led night churches can totally use stoles as much as anyone else, and to our listeners and viewers.
Ooh. So you get 15% off your stole order if you use the code 2-on-1, all one word, at checkout.
I'm totally checking it out right after this.
Perfect. Thank you so very much for being
our guest
today. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I want you to talk about our resurrection series.
Yes. So next month, or next week, which is next month, which is, oh gosh, so many things. Our first post-resurrection 2-on-1, we will be talking about The Boy Who Lived. We have Harry Potter from the perspective of a Hufflepuff coming at you with Rachel Noel Johnson, who I'm very excited to bring in. And then after that, we have Charles Anthony Bryant coming for Harry Potter from the perspective of a Ravenclaw. And if you are a Gryffindor or a Slytherin out there in a faith community, hit me up. Hit us up. Let us know. We are doing a month-long series of Harry Potter through the understanding of your house.
Mm-hmm. And remember, it's pronounced Tuonwan, not Tuunwan. And this has been a Leviosa joke, working on it. Thank you.